Summer 1941 opens with a quiet that feels rehearsed. Along the eastern frontier, men rise before dawn and follow routines that seem ordinary from a distance. Boots are checked, straps are tightened, and a last swallow of cold coffee steadies the hands. Columns stand in patient lines while officers mark small notes on paper that will soon look outdated. The scene suggests order and confidence, yet the margins hint at strain. The land is wide, roads are few. Distance invites delay. What follows may resemble a plan carried out to its limits by people who trust their preparations and hope that the calendar stays kind. This program presents a speculative narrative built on public records, wartime bulletins, and period diaries that survive in archives. It does not claim final truth. Some details remain uncertain. Names are not our focus. Devices and counts are not repeated. The aim is a sober reconstruction of how events might have felt and appeared to participants who recorded what they could see. The language remains cautious. Where sources disagree, we signal possibilities rather than verdicts. Where memory conflicts with reports, we weigh context and move forward with care. The story proceeds in the time of its era and remains there. It follows the opening surge into deep territory, the tightening encirclements, and the long road toward a political prize that many believed would end the campaign. Nothing here resolves at once. Momentum can mirror miscalculation. Progress can hide cost. The record suggests that both impressions coexisted from the first week. Our path traces that tension and stops where a new threshold appears, leaving questions for a future segment to carry further. The first days unfold with a tempo that seems practiced and swift, though every step reveals how large the stage has become. At sunrise, the roads appear to move, not from any shape of the land, but from the steady march of boots, hooves, and engines that pull the line east. Air smells of dust and damp soil. Field cooks work in a hurry and leave faint fires to die on the verge. Officers glance at folded sheets marked with arrows that look simple when the paper is clean and flat. Those arrows do not show how a single cart breaks an intersection or how a bridge takes longer than hoped. The advance reaches villages that have lived for seasons by the turn of the plow and the change of the sky. Doors are shut or half open. Curtains lift and fall. People stand back, uncertain if they should wave, hide, or watch. Some houses are already empty. A few yards from the road, a child holds a pail as if waiting for water that will not come soon. Reports sent in the afternoon speak of speed and cohesion. The phrasing is clipped and assured. Distances are measured by milestones, as if each stone confirms the map. Yet notes in private books add friction to the same day. A captain writes that a convoy missed its meeting point and waited 3 hours along a line of poplars that offered no shade. A driver remarks that the road disappeared into soft soil, and the last segment of a column had to push the front out with hand signals and shouts. The land does not resist in force at first, which gives the sense of a gate left open, but the open gate leads into rooms without walls. It is easy to enter and harder to hold. A wagon left in a ditch becomes a marker that others try to pass without slipping into the same pit. Fuel cans change hands more than once before they reach the unit that needs them most. A message run by motorcycle arrives with a smear of mud that hides a digit, and a platoon turns right instead of left. These are not great failures. They are ordinary frays in a long thread. They matter because the thread runs farther than planned. 2 indicators frame the day. A morning bulletin praises firm movement toward designated lines, which suggests a timetable is still in use. An evening diary notes that rations were short by 1 meal, which hints at a pace that outruns its own support. Neither source is final. Together, they suggest the feel of a push that searches for rhythm. The sun sets late in this latitude. When night comes, it is sudden and without a lantern's grace. Men sleep near their packs and wake to take a turn on the road again, and the fields widen into new fields that look the same. In the distance, a river gives a silver edge to the dark. That line will need a route across it by tomorrow. A runner folds his order and tucks it under his tunic, and the column starts with the same confidence and the same small doubts that shared the day. The sound narrows to steady footfalls and the clatter of loose gear. Ahead, markers painted years ago still stand where local officials once measured parish borders, and now they mark a passage that grows harder to read with every mile. Men adjust straps and ration the last spoon of jam and count how many hours they can hold the pace without a halt. The air cools and smells of rye and river mud. The bridge ahead may be intact or may be ash by the time the column reaches it. The map shows a bend and a ford and a mill that could be useful if it is not already burned. Momentum carries them through the night as if distance were a promise that could be kept by will. Toward the next morning, attention settles on a town square where a church clock keeps imperfect time and a small ledger on a table records arrivals and routes that will shape the next turn east. By the third week, the movement gains a new pattern that appears tidy on paper and rough in the field. Units fan out and attempt to meet again on the far side of a circle that shrinks by the hour. Cartographers sit on crates and copy the arcs with careful hands while couriers stand ready for the names that will decide where to press next. To the south, a column reports that it saw abandoned coats and bread still warm in a farmhouse. To the north, another column notes empty trenches and a few grenades that had not been pulled from their hooks. It seems the defenders break and run, yet the circle does not close without struggle. Paths turn to sand. A wheel cracks on a hidden stump. A clerk who wrote neat numerals on the first page of June writes over them now with smudged lines because the numbers do not fit the hour. The official line begins to use the word pocket, and those who read it imagine a clean fold that tucks the enemy away. Letters from the field reveal a different texture. A truck of the signals company is found stuck on a clay slope where rain came in a sudden burst, and those who should have laid wire spend the afternoon pushing with their shoulders. A battalion halts to draw water. A woman brings a pail and asks nothing. She sets it down and steps back and watches them drink in silence. The pocket exists because a line closed behind the defenders, but inside that line are woods, boggy ground, and tracks that a local can read in the way a stranger cannot. This slow literacy of the land shows itself in small ways. A path that seems direct ends in reeds that swallow the boot. A short, straight slog to a village takes twice the time of a longer route along higher ground. The clock in headquarters does not show such turns. Two indicators rise and fall as if they were a pulse. In the morning, a communique lists a high count of captured men and materials, which suggests that the circles hold. Near dusk, a field notebook mentions that the cordon is stretched thin and that mess wagons did not arrive, which suggests that control is measured in narrow threads rather than solid bands. Somewhere within the tightening arcs, a few groups still move at night and seek the places where the ring is least watched. Farmers hear steps in the lanes and decide to pretend they did not hear them. A shopkeeper ties his apron tighter and keeps his eyes on the counter. The encirclement reads like mastery in print and feels like fatigue at the edge. The men who close the circle begin to guess where the next circle must form, and that guess shapes their march more than any call from a rear office. The pace draws long lines on faces that look older now than their papers say. Even the maps that define the day begin to show the press of use. A corner tears. Tape leaves a stain. An officer folds the sheet on his knee and draws a charcoal line to account for a broken road that no record had shown last year. There is a pattern here that promises closure but leaves frayed ends each evening, and those ends drift into new knots by morning. At a crossroads stand 3 signboards that point in directions written in 2 languages, each a memory of previous administrations that kept records for tax and harvest. The names matter less than the shape of the terrain that lies between them. The men who stand there raise their canteens and look toward a low ridge where observers have placed a scope on a tripod. A careful count is taken and written in a small book that smells of damp leather. A bell in a village rings once and then stops. Nearby, a quartermaster assigns flour to a unit that arrived with half its roster and takes a note to account for the rest. The circle begins to tighten again, and the habit of closing becomes an end in itself. The mind turns to the larger aim that sits beyond these local folds and arcs. The path forward leads away from the pockets and toward a city whose name carries the gravity of politics as well as streets and rail lines. With dusk approaching, the staff gathers under a canvas cover and aligns their measures to point at the seat that many believe would settle the campaign if only the road holds. And the markers for that road are placed on a crude board that points toward the administrative center that has become the next objective. The decision to bear down on the political heart gives the advance a shape that feels direct and fateful. The language in morning briefings reflects this pressure. Terms like corridor, axis, and outer ring start to appear, though the men on the road care more about shade, water, and a steady pace. The long plains begin to ripple into forests that close the view. Where the map shows a straight line, the ground offers a slalom of narrow lanes, soft shoulders, and culverts of doubtful strength. Supplies follow, but arrive just late enough to cause quiet worry. A driver marks the days on the inside of a door with a pencil stub. An officer sketches a fork of the highway and writes a simple note under it. If left is blocked, use the orchard. Such lines are not strategy. They are small repairs to a plan that still aims at a center it can see only as a name. The reports sent back remain firm. They note gains in miles and crossings completed on schedule. The papers that reach headquarters favor clarity over friction and present a line that tightens each day. Yet diaries kept by men at the front show a competing truth. A column spends an afternoon waiting for a bridgehead to be cleared of debris that was left by a retreating crew. The weather changes. Rain comes in sheets that turn shoulders of the road to paste. Animals stop and refuse to move until the surface dries. In a barn, a sergeant writes that his men slept in turns on bales because the floor flooded. Such small notices are not heroic and not alarming. They are cumulative. The closer the march comes to the city, the more it feels like a long breath that must be held. A brief afternoon lull offers a view of tall chimneys far off. Some say they belong to a district that feeds the capital. Others think they are nearer than they look. This kind of uncertainty repeats through the week, and a subtle shift takes hold. The rumor that arrival alone would produce a settlement begins to soften. There is still belief in the effect of a sudden entrance into the administrative core. There is less belief that the door will open at a knock. Two indicators frame this change. A midday bulletin announces that forward patrols reached a landmark within planned range, which suggests that the table of distances is still credible. A late entry in a headquarters log adds that gaps appeared on the flanks because units assigned to guard the supply corridor arrived under strength, which suggests that the approach narrows at a cost. Civil space near the line shows signs of strain without definite collapse. Timetables that used to list market days now carry blank spaces for certain weeks. A notice on a town hall door asks residents to stay clear of roads after sunset. A rail yard holds a string of cars that no one moves because the signal office lost contact with the next station. In this setting, progress feels steady and brittle at once. A company that reaches a village on a gentle ridge sees the road fall ahead like a ribbon. The view tempts a push. A single ditch can stall it. Boots are heavy. Sleeves are rolled. A chaplain opens a pocketbook and closes it again after a line or two. No speech is made. A small field kitchen warms a thin stew. Men eat and listen to the sounds of wagons and engines that never quite fall silent. Toward evening, a gust drops a cloud of chaff from poplars that line the lane. It sticks to wet cuffs and the side of a truck. Nothing in the scene suggests a choice of grand weight. Yet every hour spent here shifts the measure of fuel and rest that must carry the push through the next district. A staff car arrives with a packet and a sheet that lists march tables for the following 2 days. The margin shows a note to revise if rain returns. The note speaks louder than the numbers. The road is not a theorem. It is ground that must let weight pass. The men sleep and wake and move again in a routine that blurs the edges of time. Near midnight, someone hears a distant bell that might be a signal, or simply a farmer's animal, unsettled by the night. There is no check to confirm which it is. The column continues. Before dawn, a haze settles across low meadows and turns the verge to gray. The city they aim for still lies ahead. The name remains strong enough to draw ranks forward. Whether the name alone can deliver the effect hoped for remains unclear. Nada serupa muncul di meja perencanaan lapangan saat agenda rute cadangan dan catatan jalur suplai mulai dibuka satu persatu untuk menilai langkah menuju hutan yang menutup arah berikutnya. From the planning table where alternate routes were laid out, the march enters a belt of forests that narrows light and swallows sound, and the easy geometry of the plains gives way to bends decided by roots, ravines and ditches that hold water longer than any map implies. The sky closes and opens in quick shifts, releasing rain that turns shoulders of the road to paste and stamps every footprint with a rim of clay. Wagons sink an inch, then two. Engines cough and recover, then falter again where the verge collapses. A clerk who kept pages crisp in June now fights to rescue a ledger from a puddle that spread under the table leg. The lead elements press ahead but lose the kind of speed that carries confidence forward to those behind. The rear halts more often, and with every halt, the line behaves like a living thing that must be coaxed to rise again. Posts are set at junctions to prevent strays, yet strays appear all the same, guided by rumor of a better lane through the trees. A runner swears he heard a bell, but the bell belongs to a herd driven toward dry shelter, not to a guidepost. The official bulletins that leave the staff tent speak of firmness and schedule, and they still mention designated points reached by evening, which suggests that the framework of the plan remains acknowledged. Yet, a staff note written in a quick slant observes that the intervals are opening, which could mean that units are losing touch or that the road itself is stealing minutes one rut at a time. Both readings make sense to those on the move. Villages inside the forest belt show a habit of practical caution. Doors stay latched. Windows open only high and narrow. A few elders stand in rain capes at the edge of the green and look down the lane without expression. A mill wheel turns slow under swollen flow and no one approaches to bargain for grain. The land does not fight with a clear hand. It fights with water and distance. Cooks try to keep fires under tin roofs and serve a thin stew that warms hands more than it fills. Sleep comes in short portions because the wet creeps up sleeves and down collars and finds every seam. The men rotate through sentry spots that give little shelter beyond the trunk of a pine and a sodden tarp stretched between branches. A chaplain writes 2 lines and then shelters the booklet in oilcloth, choosing caution over eloquence. The pace of news from the front narrows to a few sentences each morning and each dusk, and each sentence carries weight out of proportion to its length. One indicator steadies nerves for a few hours. A noon report from a field office states that a key crossing outside a market town is usable, which implies that traffic can still sort itself by the published sequence. Another indicator pulls them back to caution. An evening entry in a quartermaster log records that reserve bread and candles ran short and that distribution will follow as the road permits, which reads like a bow toward chance. The ground itself offers verdicts that no paper can revise. A cart is found overturned where a root rises under mud like a hidden beam. A pair of boots sits by a fire ring without an owner, abandoned because they chafed and split at the heel. A horse refuses the slope and must be led in a wide circle to find higher, firmer path. Men start to count paces between drains that actually work. They choose to step in the same prints as the man before, trusting that a tested shape will hold. Tremors of resolve do not mean collapse. They mean that every small task demands patience the plan did not price. Forward elements report a rise where firmer ground lets the column breathe. There the road curves and lifts out of the trees and wind strips rain from the sleeves as if to forgive the last hour. From that crest, a patchwork of clearings appears, each with a barn roof shining wet, each with a track that may be passable if taken in a slow arc rather than a straight plunge. The mind turns again to the larger aim. The city remains distant, but the name still binds duty to direction. Those who write the briefings choose the word continued more often than completed, and that choice feels honest to the feet that carry the burden. In the evening, a few pages of an agenda from a district office are found in a drawer of a former schoolhouse, and the dates hint at a hurried relocation of desks and stamps and files. which may mean the administrative corps is already adjusting to a long siege, rather than a sudden visit. Nothing in that find changes orders, but it does color expectations about the reception ahead. Men who had spoken of a quick entry speak less and look more at the ground in front of their toes. The night grows colder, and a ribbon of fog pulls between low trunks like smoke without fire. The line sleeps in shifts and wakes with the same reluctant strength that has carried it since the first downpour. At dawn, cooks pass tin cups of bitter brew, and the forest loosens into fields that slope toward a rail embankment scratched with old posts. Menjelang siang, perhatian bergeser ke meja tempat daftar periksa sudah menunggu karena penjagaan jembatan kecil di sisi timur memerlukan rute cadangan jika tanggul di bawah rel kembali tergerus air. The rail embankment holds for now, and traffic trickles over the small bridge in a pattern that feels choreographed, though the musicians keep losing their place to wind and mud. Once across, the land opens again, but it opens unevenly, and the line of advance begins to behave like a thin thread laid over a rough table. Contact points that seem secure on the map start to drift as the day lengthens, and the command rhythm slows to accommodate distance, not discretion. Signals move, but not always to the right ear. A liaison rides with a note folded in wax paper and returns late enough that his report turns stale before it is read. Intervals between units lengthen by small margins that would not matter in a short drive, but accumulate into worry when the sun arcs toward late afternoon. The official communique emphasizes that the front stands firm and that the perimeter remains intact from North Hinge to South Hinge, and the phrasing sounds familiar and stable, which helps those who must believe in structure. A field entry kept by a logistics officer tells another side. It notes that deliveries to several points arrived after dark, and that some portions were held back west of a marsh because the track was judged unsafe. A decision that suggests prudence and also reveals the line's hunger. Both lines of record can be true. The body can appear strong while the limbs tire. In towns far behind the edge, small notices appear on doors to explain shortened hours. A clerk writes that the office will open if roads allow, and no one tries to argue with the weather. In hamlets placed like islands of light across the plain, lamps burn sooner each evening and are hooded to keep glow off the lane. Here the long front shows its true nature. It is not a wall. It is a census of positions kept by men who know the nearest tree by touch in the dark. Patrols report small gaps where reeds grow thick and frogs call in chorus. These places are not wide, but they serve as gates to anyone who can read them. The staff recognizes the problem and assigns small groups to lean against these seams until larger pieces can slide into place. The men chosen for this task know what it means. They sleep less and eat cold. They watch the horizon for a small change in tone that could be wind or movement. The front extends, and with extension comes change in the tenor of letters home. The early notes spoke of movement and surprise. The new notes speak of weight and time. Some write about the sound of the earth when frozen at dawn and the way breath hangs before the mouth in a short cloud. No one writes about glory. They write about tasks. A storehouse that once supported a district now tries to feed a corridor. A smith who worked by appointment now turns out repairs on first sight, keeping no book because there is no point in counting. Signs of friction appear in places that earlier days would have passed without comment. A water cart stands with a broken shaft, and a line forms behind it, not because water is scarce, but because the lanes around it are too soft to bear two passing loads. The air carries the smell of damp straw, oil, and a faint sweetness from grain spilled and ground into mud under thousands of feet. When resistance appears, it is sharp and local, then gone. The effect on the march is not the loss of ground, but the loss of sequence. Things happen out of turn. A unit meant to be second becomes fourth at the crossing and arrives at dusk when the light gives out. A clerk with a careful hand tries to stitch the order back into place and discovers that paper cannot move men faster than the ground permits. Two indicators bookend the day again. A mid-morning radio schedule logged at a relay house confirms that contact was made up and down the corridor within the planned window, which supports the assertion of a connected line. A past midnight entry in a supply ledger records that several depots issued emergency allowances beyond ration to forward companies, which signals a quiet admission that the plan met the edge of its own reach. The men are not surprised. They have been living inside these margins for weeks. Civilians along the lane adapt in small ways that look like silence. Laundry is done at night and hung in kitchens. Animals move early before traffic begins. Children are kept indoors with chalk and slates. Barn doors are latched from inside with a length of chain and a block of wood, not for fear of theft, but because the wind keeps taking them open and scattering chaff, where men need clear floors to sleep. Toward the end of the week, a dry wind arrives from the east and drags chill with it. Snow has not fallen, but the air feels like a promise of ice. Men look to their coats and find them wanting. They stuff newspaper under tunics where the cloth thins at the shoulders. A memo from a staff office reminds units to rotate sentries faster, and though the tone is procedural, the fact of its issue hints that those who write it have read reports that show fingertips turning numb on posts where the night digs in. The line holds, but it's holding costs attention that used to be spent on speed. From the crossroads where a discarded signboard leans, the next route runs toward a rise that leads to villages built of wood and packed earth. And from there the path enters open fields that a north wind has hardened into a surface bright as pottery at dawn, which means the march will find distance easier for a day and harder the day after when the freeze deepens. Isyarat itu berlanjut ke dataran tinggi kecil di balik pos rel, di mana penjaga pos mencatat jadwal malam dan petugas perbekalan mengecek daftar baju hangat, sementara kalender menunjukkan hari-hari pendek yang menunggu di depan. By the time the wind turns steady from the north, the campaign breathes in shorter measures, and the phrase of the advance changes from declarations to acknowledgments. Mornings begin in a stillness that feels brittle. Frost makes the verges shine like glass and then crumble under the first weight. Men wrap scarves high and pull gloves on stiff fingers, then rub them hard to spark warmth that lasts only a minute. Fires are kept low to hide their light, which means water warms, but does not boil as quickly as patience runs. The path to the political center no longer appears as a line that tightens. It looks like a rope under strain, fraying at points of repeated use. The bulletins from staffs inland continue to report progress by reference to selected points. They are not false. Selected points are reached. Yet between those points, the day fills with delays that no one has the authority to erase. A felled tree across a lane becomes an hour of improvisation. A culvert that held all summer develops a seam, and the field beyond it floods into a shallow mirror that deceives a step and swallows a wheel. The enemy appears more often in organized shape now, positioned where the ground favors a halt rather than a chase. Skirmishes bite and then break off, leaving a sense that someone has learned the rhythm of the advance and now plays against it with a practiced ear. In the margins of this changing score, the human signs of strain become ordinary. Letters mention feet that do not warm until midday, and the way breath stings the throat at first watch. An officer folds his scarf over his mouth and speaks less to save his voice. A corporal who has not missed a day since June asks to rest an afternoon and is granted the hour without comment. No one mentions numbers or devices. They speak the language of bodies and roads. Two indicators define the tone of the week. A morning sheet circulated at a regional office states that administrative functions are being rearranged farther east, which suggests the opposing structure expects to sustain pressure and possibly regain space. An evening page from a field archive lists several instances where planned relief failed to arrive at the scheduled moment, which signals that depth behind the front is thinning. These documents are simple and they do not call attention to themselves, but the care in their handwriting feels like a hand placed on a table to steady it. Towns near the line look tamped down by cold. Windows are sealed with paper and paste. A schoolroom holds piles of winter coats that do not fit well, shared by those assigned to keep order. Markets run from sheds rather than squares. A woman sells root vegetables from a crate and keeps a pencil in her sleeve to record customers, though she writes only initials now, judging that details are a liability. Men pass and glance, and the exchange stays wordless. No one tries to define the moment. They live inside it. The plan that opened the summer relied on speed and surprise. The winter asks for reserve and patience, and reserve has bled into the road behind them. A lieutenant draws a small calendar for his platoon that shows the last 7 days crossed off and the next 7 blank. He tells his men nothing about what the blank means. He has not been told either. Crews learn where to stand to be out of the wind when waiting for rations, and they teach new arrivals to choose that lee first. The tilt of a barn offers shelter to 4, not to 12. Choices sharpen in this way, not in any grand council. The approach to the city becomes a series of pauses where the cost of each next street is weighed against cold, light, and the likelihood of fuel in the morning. It is not indecision. It is arithmetic done with breath and fatigue. A column reaches a ridge that once seemed close to a rail spur, known by its station master's name, and now the station seems farther than the map promised. Men wait for a signal from a runner who left at dusk and should have returned by midnight. He finds a drifted lane and a gate wired shut and returns at 2 in the morning with a note that the spur can be used if cleared at first light. The note is dry, and that is a victory. It did not freeze inside his coat. At dawn, the world rings with a thin sound that comes when frost tightens fibers and metal. It is the kind of noise that invites caution. The men listen, then move in a line that looks slower than before but wastes no step. The city remains the name on the page that gives the day its direction. But the faith that its capture will settle the contest now shares space with the suspicion that even a gate forced open will ask for more than a flag and a claim. There is no collapse. There is weight, and there's a sense of the road turning from a runway to a test. From the ridge, the view runs over bare fields to a dark line of trees that mark the next watercourse. And behind those trees, the spires and chimneys of the outer districts make a low, jagged edge against a pale sky. Dari ruang sebelumnya, fokus berpindah ke jalur sungai yang membeku tipis saat catatan terakhir disalin untuk tahap selanjutnya yang menuntut penyeberangan hati-hati di ambang musim yang mengeras. The year edges toward its shortest days, and the advance settles into a cadence shaped more by temperature and ground than by any promise made in summer. Orders continue to flow, sharp and brief. They keep direction clear, while distance and weather keep progress conditional. The documentary record offers only fragments here. A late report confirms a bridge usable after a hard freeze. A separate diary implies that several units timed their march to that window and still arrived with less strength than planned. Both entries may be accurate. Neither resolves the larger question. The political center still stands ahead, close enough to influence decisions, far enough to drain strength before it yields. Among the ranks, routine becomes a discipline. Gloves are dried over coals. Socks are rotated by habit. The small motions that preserve endurance take precedence over bold gestures. Men raid the sky at dawn and decide whether frost will bite before noon or lift enough to permit a crossing without loss. Signals reach, falter, then reach again. The shape of the front holds, though it thins at edges that cannot be everywhere watched. There are no final statements in this hour. There are adjustments, and there is the quiet that follows a long day when breath steams in the dark and no one speaks more than is necessary. What remains uncertain is not the will to continue, but the price demanded by ground and season to hold each mile taken. Reports may call the line firm, while diaries list the rations short. Both can coexist without contradiction. In the coming stretch, the river ahead will decide tempo, the cold will decide length of halts, and the city will continue to exert gravity without offering terms. If momentum returns, it will return in careful steps. If the road hardens against them, they will feel it first in the hands and the lungs before any map admits it. The ledger is open to another page. Which entries will follow belongs to the next segment, where crossings, quarters, and the slow turn of resolve take their places in order.